Do a barrel roll.
Welcome to the Know. I'm Ashley.
I'm John.
So we know a couple things that don't fly too well on Steam for indie developers.
Okay.
One, threatening gamers with legal action, which we had the other story on that
Happens.
just today. Ripping off assets
Not good.
and making death threats of Gabe Newell. And, well, add one more to the list because apparently it's being too sexy. And maybe too controversial, so you better watch out. You're in trouble.
Okay, so the Naughty Party Simulator and Let's Play Goldmine House Party has officially been removed from Steam due to questionable content. The game has certainly been at the center of some heated discussion since its first launched, and its removal now begs some big questions about censorship and the stigma around sex in video games.
All right, first, before we tackle all the societal questions, a little bit of background about House Party itself. The game launched last month on Steam. It isn't really shy about what it is. It's very self-aware. Basically, it's a dirty house party sim with all the naughty bits that implies, but generally handled with a sense of humor, bit tongue-in-cheek. Some of that humor hasn't been all that well received with everyone, but more on that part in a second.
Yeah, so developer Eek Games describes House Party on its own website by saying, in the game, you'll experience the usual debauchery found at these types of parties in the form of foul language, party games, nudity, fighting, sex, and more. And believe me, it doesn't pull any punches.
I feel like I go to very different kinds of parties. Due to its content, the game's gathered a bit of a devoted following on YouTube with several personalities covering it via Let's Play since it launched, like Mache, Captain Sauce, Mess Yourself, and PewDiePie. Thanks to that coverage, House Party has a pretty respectable 35,000 owners.
But with that coverage also came some controversy and negative attention, mostly because of a few choice quest lines in the game, which include mashing a button to pleasure yourself and getting women drunk so they'll sleep with you. Certain critics out there didn't take too kindly to that, with the National Center on Sexual Exploitation in particular voicing their concerns.
Executive Director John Hawkins said, "The House Party hookup game is literally training its users in predatory tactics for sexual assault and even sex trafficking, which plague real living people offline in high schools, universities, military bases, and more. The game includes disturbing features that allow users to increase their odds of having sex with a woman in the game if they manipulate and coerce women into sex acts."
For the developer's part, they've maintained that the game is a parody about choice, saying video games are about fantasy, and in this case, you're playing the part of a horny young adult who is driven by his hormones, and as a result, is forced to choose usually between a stupid or a stupider choice in a given situation, and sometimes the choices are of a moral nature.
Alright, so not too surprising to find out that because of all that, the game has now been removed from Steam. The removal happened this week, with fans noticing the game was no longer officially listed on the platform, despite Valve recently creating a sexual content tag where users can look for games with sexually explicit images or references.
Didn't know that was a tag that was available.
It is.
We'll go check that out. After getting questioned by fans, developer Eek Games addressed the removal in a new blog post on its website, writing, "Steam very kindly reached out to me about the removal, and I am working with them to resolve their concerns and get the game back up for sale. Those who already bought the game, who will still own it, and be able to play it and receive updates through Steam in the meantime."
So why exactly did it go down? Now, from the sounds of it, there are several groups or organizations that have been hounding Steam about House Party since it launched about a month ago, and unfortunately for the developers, it looks like that pressure may have been a little bit too much for them to leave the game up in its current state.
The developers are now working to retool the game a bit and modify it from its original release in order to make it more palatable to general audiences. However, it does sound like Valve really didn't want this situation to come to that.
Yeah, Eek went on to state, "I didn't get the impression from Steam's representative that they wanted to remove my game, but more so that they were ill-equipped to handle the selling of that type of game on their store, that being a game with nudity and sex in it. I don't know if that alludes to the promise of a place on Steam where games like mine in their unaltered form can exist, maybe with some type of age verification system, but I am hopeful that this is the case."
So, naturally, some of the game's fans are calling this censorship, and it's mostly because Valve doesn't have an elegant solution.
Yeah, okay, so that raises some interesting questions about why Valve doesn't do exactly what Eek is talking about and just create a separate walled-off section of Steam that can support this type of content that'd probably be much more beneficial to all parties involved, since many of the complaints against House Party and games like it revolve around the ease at which minors can get a hold of these games.
However, that doesn't address the issue that minors can just as easily access games with blood, gore, and violence, or the issue that there are dozens of other games with graphic sexual content in them as well that still continue to exist on Steam.
Like most of the visual novel genre, which is nice.
Although some of those games get around that by selling modified versions on Steam and then getting dirtier with patches you have to download off the platform.
Right, and that's A-okay as far as Steam's concerned. Part of the reluctance on Valve's part to step in and police this more thoroughly probably is because they're in the business of more or less letting Steam run itself. The more it can just create money for them without their involvement, the better. They rely a lot on crowdsourcing of reviews and ratings, of flagging inappropriate content, of like what to surface and what not to surface. All that. But of course, we've seen that get them into quite a bit of trouble on multiple occasions. It's affected everything from the Greenlight program to early access, even the marketplace.
So it seems like part of the problem is just that Valve wasn't prepared for this kind of scenario and doesn't have much of a ready solution for games similar to House Party, which is why a whole lot of them just end up on Patreon and bypass platforms like Steam altogether.
Yeah, Patreon was where that game was where you have a farm and you basically raise animals and then the animals but they're like sort of humanized animals anthropomorphized, and then they bang each other. It's all super weird. Patreon. Most of Patreon's biggest projects are all in that category.
Yeah, and really this is something Valve probably should have anticipated. After all, most of the reactions to the game are typically how is this even allowed on Steam, even from the YouTubers who goofed around with it on Let's Plays.
You know, whether you found the content objectionable or not, there was always going to be a problem with access. And it's actually kind of surprising I haven't run into this before due to some of the more violent games on the platform. But let's all remember, sex bad, violence awesome.
Ultimately, the developer of House Party feels like maybe Steam just isn't ready for it. They went on to say, I don't agree with Steam's decision, but I respect it. I was hoping that their allowance of the game for well over a month, during which time it has been a top seller, was indicative of Steam stepping forward and acknowledging this hypocrisy and taking a stance on it. But it seems the removal was either a case of the game falling through the cracks or a response from the pressure of the community members who were very aggressively calling for Steam's removal of the game at the expense of those who enjoy it.
Yeah, so we're gonna have to wait and see. A lot of things are wait and see if fans are happy with how the game is modified when it comes back, whether or not Steam has to start cracking down even harder on other similar games, or whether we eventually get the walled off area for the big kids.
Yeah, what do you guys think of the controversial House Party getting pulled from Steam for its sexual content? Let us know in the comments.
And for future updates on games that are just way too sexy, remember to like this video and subscribe to the know.
Cool, I gotta go play PUBG.
Bye! The game just launched on Steam.
Well, just launched last month, sorry. That was a blank I meant to say.
Oh, okay.
Because I didn't know exactly when it launched, but it's launched.
Mostly because of a few choice questions in the game, which include...
Questlines.
Blah, blah, blah.